to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Community Development Committee for the Metropolitan Council for June 17th, 2024. I'm Councilmember Robert Lilligren, the chair of the committee, joined by a quorum of this committee. Council members, the first order of business on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I know there's some changes. Councilmember Wolf.
I would request to remove the number 2 item under consent, 2024-141, West Mississippi Regional Trail Park Acquisition Opportunity Fund Award. Remove that from the consent agenda and just vote on it normally under the non-consent.
Great. We will make 2024-141 the first item on the non-consent agenda.
Second item. Oh,
Sure.
yeah, it will be the first item. Never mind.
Thank you. Thanks.
My bad.
I'm easily confused today, Councilmember Wolf.
I think we all are.
So that'll be item number 1 on non-consent. Any other changes to the agenda? If not, we will consider this an approved agenda, moving item 2024-141 to the first non-consent agenda item. Great, we have an agenda. Next is approval of the minutes of the June 3rd, 2024 Community Development Committee.
I would move the minutes with the one typo that I pointed out.
Oh, right, thank you, Councilmember Wolf.
Although we welcome her in District 1.
Right, with the correction of your district number. Michelle, thank you. Councilmember Wolf, with that correction, has moved approval of the June 3rd, 2024 Community Development Committee minutes. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson. Any further corrections? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? That carries. Next is our 2-item consent agenda, 2024-140 and 2024-161 on consent. Is there a motion to approve, please?
Move approval.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss, Councilmember Wolf. In discussion, hearing none, all in approval, please say aye.
Aye.
That carries. So we'll move on to our non-consent items, and the first will be 2024-141, the West Mississippi Regional River Regional Trail. Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the reason I asked this to be pulled from the consent agenda is, once again, we are buying a large parcel for a trail, and we have not seen a long-term plan for a linear park or what is to happen with all of that extra land. And I've expressed several times that I'm not going to keep voting for it without a plan. And it's ironic that it's on the same meeting as the Vermillion River Greenway Regional Trail land acquisition, because you see on that one, if you read your packet before the meeting, that the county only is acquiring the part of the parcel that they need for the trail, and then Dakota County CDA is acquiring the part that can be future development, and then there's another part that's set aside for future right-of-way. That's how it should happen when you have a larger parcel like that, if it's not part of a park, like a linear park corridor or something that has a plan. And we have, it seems like, a different standard for trail acquisition than we do for park acquisition, because for park acquisition, you have to be within the boundary, and it really designates this is the land that's going to be park. We're not having that sort of standard for a trail. We're just saying however big of a parcel you want to get, as long as the trail goes through it, we're not going to have any accountability for that. And I don't think that that's a smart way to use the public dollars without accountability. So I will be voting no on that one.
Thank you, Councilmember. We do have Mr. Mullen here. I don't know if you wanted to address any of Councilmember Wolf's concerns? Or did you want to say something?
Well, before Emmett comes up, I'd be happy to add, Mr. Chair, that as part of the master plan for this segment of the West Mississippi River Regional Trail, as in their plan that the council has approved, that the Three Rivers Park District has indicated that they're looking to create, acquire properties to have that access to the riverfront along this corridor. It is the roadway, the parcel, and then the river. There isn't a lot of, there's nothing else in between there. And so that was their stated intent as part of their regional plan, was to give that experience to users to be able to physically connect to the Mississippi River. I don't know, Emmett, if there are other things you wanted
Thank
to
you.
add.
Mr. Mullen, anything to add?
Mr. Chair and committee members, I'm Emmett Mullen, the Parks Manager. Councilmember Wolf, thanks for your question. In the future, I would love to sit down with you and maybe Three Rivers staff, and we can walk through the plan, because as Lisa did just say, the plan does identify some land acquisition to occur. They're looking to create opportunities to get down into the river environment, and particularly to provide both recreational benefits, but also land conservation benefits. This particular parcel is in the city of Dayton, and we are using Environment and Natural Resources Trust Fund dollars because of the high-quality nature of this parcel. This is one that the Metropolitan Parks and Open Space Commission reviewed, and they recommended unanimously that we move forward with it. So I do apologize if there was a misunderstanding with this, and I am happy to talk to you outside of these meetings about this plan and about the future of this trail.
Thank you. Further comment, Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't think it's a misunderstanding. I totally understand having points to get along the river, but if you're going to take large swaths, I mean, this is not the first or even the fourth or fifth time I think that this has come before us without, a counting of how many of these parcels will be acquired, and some of them had houses on them, so it's not like they're not developable parcels. If it's going to be basically a linear park, then show us what exactly you're going to do. And if it's not, then allow for development at the top of the bluff and people having access at the bottom. I just, like I said, I think Dakota County is doing it right, being accountable for all of the acreage rather than we might get parcels, we might not. And, so far I haven't seen anywhere we're getting easements along there. It's been all acquiring the whole parcel. And if that's the plan for the entire swath, then let's say so, or delineate how many of them you're planning to acquire, because this nebulous thing just doesn't work for me.
Thank you, Councilmember. I see Councilmember Chavez is requesting the floor, and also maybe turn to the Councilmember of the district, Councilmember Johnson, for comment. Councilmember Chavez.
Yeah, I just want a little bit more clarification concerning the interests and the issues, but especially the issues. I do know that when you have a parcel that involves one or more cities, a lot of times the city does weigh in on that decision, either in agreement or disagreement. I know that a lot of times when we make decisions about acquisitions and land use, we do have to, well, most of the time, all the time, we do have to follow what's in statute. And I'm sure it's recommended to follow what has been done based on precedent. And if there is a change from the statute or based on the land use precedent, I think there's a process for modifying that policy, and that certainly each council member may not agree with one another on either the statute or the precedent or how it's done, the way that it's done, et cetera. So with my thinking that it is within policy, it is within statute, and does follow precedent, I would like to approve this, but also follow the process if we do need to adjust or correct something in the future. But I would lean towards, if it's in statute, if it's within our land use current policy existing, and follows the typical precedent that we continue to approve these types of requests, whether it's a trail or a park, because we've had similar comments regarding this issue, and maybe, look at it in another way, but I intend to support it at this point.
Thank you, Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And so, Councilmember Wolf, have you expressed this concern prior to tonight?
Oh, yes.
And so I guess I would just ask, since Councilmember Wolf is a member of this, and I didn't see that in the report, is there a process when, council member brings something to staff? Do we go back to Three Rivers, to the community, and or are we just very confident that it's following the processes that we've set forth, even though they can vary from the Dakota County piece that we had earlier to this, for example?
Mr. Mullen?
Until tonight, I didn't realize that, there was somebody who had a concern. Not that I necessarily would, but it sounds like staff had been briefed on it. So just kind of curious about prepping for this meeting with the concern that was raised.
Thank you, Councilmember. Mr. Mullen?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, thanks for your question. I am aware to a degree, but I don't think I fully understand Councilmember Wolf's concern. The plan that Three Rivers put forward for the West Mississippi River Regional Trail, they did say that they plan to acquire interest in land through easement and right-of-way. This trail does go along a busy road. I think the speed limit on the road is 50 miles per hour. And so it'll be separated. But I think that the Three Rivers Park District has a real desire to get this regional trail further from the roadway. And they have identified in that plan, and they did identify land to be acquired, but they said we work on a willing landowner basis. And so when opportunities present themselves, they wanted to pursue fee title acquisition. And so this is, as the Councilmember Wolf said, this isn't I think that we've seen maybe 3 or 4 of these West Mississippi River Regional Trail requests come through in the last year or two. When this one came up, and it was a high-quality natural resource on the Mississippi River, I didn't think, I'm sorry I didn't understand, but I didn't see anything controversial about this.
Thank you, Councilmember. And just to Councilmember Chavez's point, Mr. Mullen, I'm looking at the report here, and just to note, the local communities are supportive of this, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion? Councilmember Carter?
This may be redundant, but I'm going to risk it anyway, because the concern that we are hearing is that there is not a plan that this acquisition falls within. I'm reading at the head of the subject property description that the 46-acre property is within council-approved boundary of the West Mississippi Regional Trail, and I know that everyone has read that, the West Mississippi River Regional Trail. I am lacking a full understanding of our expectation for a plan and whether that expectation is something that we can clarify. The Councilmember Wolf has an expectation that it should be within a plan. I have heard mention of the statute, mention, of course, of our plan, and it does not sound as though staff believes there is a conflict. If we can please get an explanation of whether that expectation that we're hearing tonight is appropriate or not, you know, how we reckon as staff that it is not something that is needed. That would be very helpful. And to the agendas moving forward, where we may have the concern, again, you know, if we can just clarify in the documentation what is there that allows us to move forward. You know, if it goes beyond that it is in our council-approved boundary, that would be helpful. Thank you very much.
Thanks. And I have a question for Councilmembers Chambliss and Johnson, but Mr. Maldonado, did you want to respond to Councilmember Carter's comments, or?
I just wanted to give Councilmember Carter confidence that this is within a council-approved long-range plan, that this is a 5.5 acre property that was approved as part of the West Mississippi River Regional Trail. And so I think that I will commit to setting up a meeting with Councilmember Wolf so I more fully understand her concerns moving forward, because I think, I mean, what I hear her saying is that she thinks that there are some things that could be more cost-effective in terms of like acquiring easements or just the road right-of-way, and take a pass on this Mississippi River shoreline and let it be developed. That's my understanding what she's saying.
Thank you, Mr. Maldonado. And I will note, in conversation before committee with Councilmember Wolf, this is an issue she has raised before. This is a consistent position. I appreciate your consistency, Councilmember Wolf. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Chair Emmett gave an explanation about which plan has been looked at by council staff, so that answered my question.
Great. Thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah, and I guess what I would just say is, again, if a perspective is known and coming forward, it might be good to just be part of the staff briefing, even though we vetted it here tonight. And additionally, I don't know if it's just a matter of how one community practices and works through their process versus another community. But for me, it's just important that it's following all the guidelines and state statutes, and if you're saying it is, I will support it. But I know that Councilmember Wolf is very knowledgeable in this area, and so I just want to, you know, give her credit where, you know, she's raising a concern.
And I'll recognize Councilmember Johnson. Is that a motion to approve?
Yes, it is. Mr.
Thanks.
Chair.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Carter. On the motion, Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the last time one of these came through, I said that I wanted either to know how many of these were going to be entirely purchased for trails, or have Three Rivers work on a plan for this as a linear park rather than a trail, because it does kind of look like they're trying to just acquire all of it and make it a de facto linear park. In our acquisitions policies, we don't say anything about what's the maximum width of land that's acquired for a trail. So you could have a 30-acre parcel along a trail corridor and purchase it. We pay for 3/4 of the acquisition with our acquisition fund, and the locals pay for 1/4. Currently, with the policy plan, they're looking at increasing the total dollar amount that each agency could use each year for acquisitions. But if we're not being careful with that money and making sure that there's either a plan for a linear park, if it's going to be really wide, or you're acquiring the parcel just for the trail and figuring out what you're going to do with the rest of it, we're not being good stewards of the regional funds. Taxpayers expect accountability. And I'm not saying this is a bad parcel, but I said the last time one of these came through, if you do this again without us figuring out how many of these they're going to get, or without having a change to a linear park plan, then I wasn't going to vote for it anymore. So I'm doing exactly what I warned you, so I'm not doing anything surprise or inconsistent. I was very clear the last time this came up that I would not vote for another one. So that's what I'm doing.
All right, I appreciate your consistency, Councilmember Wolf. Did you want to say? Okay, cool. All right, appreciate it. We have a motion before us. Any further discussion on the motion?
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
Just
Councilmember
that
Johnson.
after staff takes another look at this, I mean, I am intrigued. I think one of my first votes as a new council member was on the trail in North Minneapolis. And I think there was something similar going on there, and you had raised it back then, and that was 5 years ago. So I just want to know as a follow-up what we can do to maybe clarify or whatever. But for tonight, I'll definitely be supporting this.
Appreciate it. Excuse me. Any further discussion on the motion? Further discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Nay?
Thank you. That carries. Thank you, Mr. Mullen. And we'll move on now to what is now our second non-consent item. That's 2024-149. It's the annual Metropolitan Regional.
All right. Good afternoon, Chair and council members. My name is Aimee Junget. I'm a budget analyst for community development. Today I am presenting the annual operations and maintenance allocation for our regional parks and trails system. First, we'll start out with some background on what our annual operations and maintenance reporting entails. Statute requires that by July 15th of each year, MPOSC reports to the council the funding requests from the implementing agencies based on the actual expenditures made in the previous year. So we receive a state appropriation for a portion of the expenses necessary to run the regional parks and trail system because the system draws a significant portion of visits from outside the metropolitan area and the state of Minnesota. On an annual basis, we review the operating expenses of each implementing agency, and we bring this report through the council at this time each year. So here shows the formula that we apply to the appropriation that we receive. It's defined in statute, and 40% is based on O&M expenses, 40% is based on system visits, and the remaining 20% is based on acreage. For state fiscal year 2025, we received a total of $11,490,000 for operations and maintenance to be allocated. This breaks down as $2.45 million in state general fund and $8.95 million in lottery in lieu of sales tax revenue. On the tables in the following slides, I will outline how that funding is allocated based on our formula. One important thing I wanted to note before we move on is that 2 agency reporting errors related to last year's data were identified in completing our process this year. So when encountering these, we have the ability to correct for those errors within the biennium. So on the following slides, you'll see a table with this year's state fiscal year 2025 calculation, and then the final shares, which take this year's shares and adjust for the errors from last year to arrive at our final shares. So these are our state fiscal year 2025 operations and maintenance allocations. You'll see expenses reported by the agencies total just above $133 million for the system. And then in the second column, the $11.5 million appropriation is allocated across agencies accordingly based on the statutory formula. And now this table here is the final allocations adjusted for the 2 reporting errors identified from last year. So this table shows the adjustments applied to this year's allocation to arrive at our final shares. Once again, operations and maintenance shares to agencies total the $11.49 million that we received as a part of the state fiscal year 2025 appropriation. So our recommended action today is that the Metropolitan Council accept the Regional Parks and Trails System State Fiscal Year 2025 Operations and Maintenance Funding requests. With that, I will take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Junket. Questions on that report? Councilmember Johnson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly on those errors, was it a numerical error? Was it an actual error in funds distributed?
Ms. Junket?
Thanks for your question, council member. So it was an error in the information that we received from the agencies that then gets input into our formula. So in our partnership, we do review that information for eligibility, but if we determine or we discover that after the fact there was an error in what was submitted, which is what happened this year, and since this is the second year in the biennium, we were able to go back and basically take the balance of what some agencies should have received, were underpaid or overpaid, and apply that to 2025.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah.
Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Wolf?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In the committee report that we got, it only had a summary of the information that happened at the MPOSC meeting, and then you had to go to the MPOSC agenda to actually see the calculations and whatnot. In the future, it would be nice to have the whole thing, if possible, not have to dig
Our
for it.
mistake.
Agreed.
Apologies for that.
We can
Yeah.
update that.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf, and I concur. Further discussion? If not, Ms. Junket has recommended that the Metropolitan Council accept the Regional Parks and Trails System State Fiscal Year 2025 Operations and Maintenance Funding Requests. Is there a motion to approve? Thank you, Councilmember Lee. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Discussion on the motion? Discussion. Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Junket. Next, non-consent item is now 2024-157. It's funding recommendations for the 2024 Round 1 Tax-Based Revitalization Account grants. And Mr. Martin is here to present. Welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am Marcus Martin. I'm the coordinator for the tax-based revitalization account. And thank you for putting this item on your agenda today. For our viewers at home, I'll start with a little background. I'm going to switch glasses here. I've reached that age, I'm afraid. All of the LCA grant programs share some goals. Those goals include creating more housing choices throughout the region, supporting the growth of living wage jobs, improving connections between where people live and work and regional amenities like parks, and supporting more equitable development outcomes. Participation in LCA is voluntary. 77 cities currently participate in the program. The applicants are cities, counties, or development authorities who partner with developers on individual projects. Projects may be located in the areas shown in yellow, and those are the areas where people are eligible to apply. Entities are eligible to apply. There are 4 active grant programs in LCA: Livable Communities Demonstration Account, Transit-Oriented Development, Local Housing Incentives Account, and the program we will focus on today, the Tax-Based Revitalization Account, or TBRA, and that is for projects that support redevelopment on properties with environmental contamination. Together, the LCA grant programs provide financial support and incentives across the stages of development. The TBRA in particular offers grant categories that help with planning and design, as well as environmental remediation before construction. In March, the council approved up to $5.5 million to be awarded in 2 funding cycles. Those are distributed in May and November. Let's see if we got that here. Each cycle, we offer 3 types of TBRA grants: environmental site investigation, otherwise known as environmental site assessment, environmental cleanup grants, and seeding equitable environmental development grants, or SEED grants, that are intended to encourage development on strategic sites in areas with either low levels of building activity, higher concentrations of low-wage jobs, low incomes, or people of color. And these sites may or may not have a specific project, but show potential for job and housing creation. So those are the 3 grant categories. Our evaluation of each application focuses on what are the expected project outcomes for TBRA. These are things like increases in the tax base, adding affordable housing or living wage jobs, and the relative risks posed by contaminants. We also look at how thoroughly the project has conducted its community engagement and the representative aspects of the development team, as well as their capacity and readiness to proceed with a project. So now we can get to this particular funding cycle. We received 5 applications this cycle. 2 of them were for investigation from Minneapolis and St. Louis Park.
Mr. Chair?
Yep.
Councilmember Wolf.
It says 14 on the,
Oh, it shouldn't say 14. It should, that's way too many. It should say 5.
I was wondering.
It should say 5.
Councilmember Wolf.
So that's a terrible mistake on my part. I apologize for that. We do have Ms. Monson here from St. Louis Park, also representing her city. So it's only 5, 2 investigation applications and 3 cleanup applications. Those were from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and White Bear Lake. The total requested was $1.6 million. The guiding state statute limits the amount of funding that can be awarded to projects in a single city, that's 50%, and projects in Minneapolis and St. Paul, 75%. However, since this grant program cycle was undersubscribed, the funding limits do not apply in this particular cycle. So let's look at the project recommendations. All right, starting with investigation. We are recommending funding for 1 investigation application from St. Louis Park for Loeffler Crossings in the amount of $46,500. And we are recommending 3 cleanup requests for funding. Funding is recommended for the Native American Community Clinic in the amount of $352,800, Gloryville in the amount of $1 million, and Wildwood Row Homes, and that should be $69,900. That's correct in the business item, incorrect here on this slide. So please note that correction. Here are a few of the selected images we received of what the projects could look like once they are built. So looking at the screen clockwise from the upper left, we have the Native American Community Clinic, Gloryville, and Wildwood Row Homes. One of the investigation applications did not have a competitive score. This is for our new Scattered Site Investigation Pilot Grant Program, which allows applicants to identify a target area for environmental site investigation and request enough funding to use on an initial site, and then use the funding for future sites as they identify them within the grant term. In this case, the city did request funding for multiple sites. However, there was no information provided about the environmental risks of the location identified in the proposal. That's the initial location. And there was also little information about the scope of work and the expected development outcomes, aside from identifying the site as a location for future residential development.
Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
if I may, back on slide 8 again,
Yes, let's go back.
if you could,
All
the
right,
second
so
bullet
let's
point
see
again.
here. All right. Back to the, is it the one with the map?
There's a map on it. It's about the 14 cleanup applications.
Okay, yep, 5, yes, correct.
So Plymouth was not one of them?
No.
Okay, so that's just all incorrect there.
Unfortunately, yes, I'm embarrassed to
Okay.
say that this is incorrect, yes.
Okay. I just making sure I understood that. Okay, great.
Okay.
Thank you. I mean, I'm asking about all of them, but Plymouth's in my district, so that's why I was like, where is the application? Okay.
Cool, thanks. Councilmember Chambliss and Councilmember Carter. Councilmember Chambliss.
I'm wondering if that was a cut and paste error. But that's not my question. My question is related to the applicant that did not get funding. Can you go back to that page? And it's related to them not being able to sufficiently identify the potential environmental health risks posed by contaminants. How specific does the applicant have to be in terms of that? Do they have to be an expert in assessing environmental health risk, or do they have to pay for an expert? Or can they talk in general terms about maybe similar projects that had been identified with potentially similar health risks? How does that evaluation process work?
Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, thank you for the question. This is a new program in terms of the scattered site aspect to it. As a comparison, when we've looked at individual single sites, what we look for is a technical report, a phase 1 environmental site assessment. Those are relatively inexpensive to produce. Generally, those, they last for a little, they have some time until there's more changes in the land use. In this case, we didn't receive any information like that or even nearby it that we could relate to the site. So we would be most interested in something like that, that allows our evaluation team to understand the risks on the site. However, at times, we have also considered information that relates to kind of historical land uses that commonly are associated with contamination. So if it was, for example, a gas station or a dry cleaner or something like that you could expect there's going to be an issue that you would like to look into. In this case, we didn't get any of that sort of information, so it was difficult to know what the risks were.
Very good.
Councilwoman Chambliss, yeah.
Thank you. So that's very helpful, and I know in the past, if a project or a program was not recommended, they have a right to get an explanation about, what they didn't do to meet the competitive qualifications, and also to reapply in another time period. Is that correct?
Thank you. Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Chambliss, yes, I do think that offering this option of assessing multiple sites will allow us to be more accessible to this particular category, to do that pre-development work. So I would like to see the city reapply with more information on the background about the sites.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember Chambliss. I had similar questions, and since this is a new category, this scattered site investigation, it'll be interesting to see how we can refine it so it's more accessible. Councilmember Carter?
This is a little bit detailed. Please forgive me, and it's detail that I don't understand. There is a chart in the materials that speaks to the affordable housing need on page 5 of 11, and I just realized I'm not understanding the columns there. It speaks to the total affordable, the affordable at or below 30, then 31 to 50, and the 51 and above to 80%. And the numbers just don't come out right for me if I look at, in particular, the St. Paul proposed units at 23, 39 at 30% or below, 25 at 31 to 50, and 0 at 51 to 80. Can you explain what I'm not understanding there? In other words, the numbers don't add up to the total affordable.
And Councilmember Carter refers to page 5 of the report. Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, if I don't have the table right in front of me right now, but
Should they add up?
Yes, so the intent of that, I'll start with offering the intent of the table, and I hope they didn't identify another error on my part. The intent was to identify more than one project, all of the affordable units in each tier of affordability. So I'm adding together, for example, the tiers in the community clinic to that one for each one, and then comparing that to the decennial goal. So Livable Communities has a 10-year goal, and that kind of just what this round, what share of that would be, those units would be for this round. So I hope I've conveyed that, but if I have not used the correct numbers, that deserves correction.
All right. I'm trying to read it as though that total affordable would equal, would be the sum of all of those columns, of the next three columns. And I'm not getting that with the St. Paul project. If you, I realize you don't have that in front of you right now, but if you could please clarify that for me in later communication, I'd appreciate it.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carr, just for clarification, the total for the city total or for the project total or
For the
both?
project total.
Okay, thank you.
I'm looking at those project totals, and I do realize we're looking at the daunting task of meeting the affordability needs, and within these projects, we're able to accomplish at the 2% level, but it's just not adding up for the project, so if you would please.
And Mr. Martin, just to note that if you look at the Minneapolis line, for example, horizontally, that does add up to 83 units, right?
Yeah.
And the St. Paul one doesn't really add up. There's some calculation.
Looks like there's an error there.
Right.
And
Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It would appear that everything got shifted over one. Where it says 23, it should be 87. And then all of those numbers move over one column.
Sure.
that may be what-
Farther down on page,
Okay, that makes me feel better.
yeah.
It's just an entry error.
Okay.
Cool.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
On
Councilmember
that
Johnson.
same slide, there's an asterisk at the bottom. And what is that referring to? I'm trying to look for what it's denoting. Only units affordable to households with income 51 to 60% of AMI included or proposed units per grant distribution criteria. Is that something in here as well?
Last column.
Mr. Martin.
So
Mr.
that's just for, I mean, okay, so can you just explain what that means?
Yes,
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, thank you for the question. In our case, for the decennial goals, we are look at a wider range of housing when we're thinking of life cycle housing. That range, those goals go up to 80% of area and median income. But for the grant purposes, we set a range. We only go up to 60%. And so I just want to reflect the difference between the city goals and the grant, how high we would go for the grant goals.
Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for that, because I'm like, we don't go this high, which has always been kind of a bummer for me, because I've had cities that go from 51 to 80 and don't get included in a lot of grant proposals or granting. So, okay, that is great. Now I understand what that means. Thank you.
Thanks. Further questions, discussion? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just point out that the funding for TBRA comes from the fiscal disparities pool. And the original purpose of it was to get polluted property back onto the tax rolls. So affordable housing isn't necessarily the number one goal of what we're doing. It's taking property that's not paying taxes and getting it back into paying taxes by cleaning it up.
Thank you, Councilmember Wolf. Councilmember Johnson.
Well, and to that point, Mr. Chair, so I was looking at those charts that you had too, and I noticed that I'm sorry, I'm moving all over the pages right now, but there were some that mentioned how much the estimated property value, taxable value, market value would go up based on something like this, and others that didn't. So is that, unless I'm reading that wrong too? Because that's interesting to me. I remember as a city official, we were always kind of like, oh, okay, that's what this money is for. And, who's tracking what that increase would be once the cleanup and development's done?
Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes. So that information should be captured individually for the project, by project, and the project summary at the end.
Okay, because I was trying to find,
You're thinking of the investigation one, doesn't have it?
oh, that doesn't include it? Okay. I just had noticed it in some and not others, and so maybe it's just the category they're in, is that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, correct. In that case, because the final development plans are less well-known, we didn't want to speculate as much on that.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Chair, I can't remember on what page this one's on, but it does talk about if the program is fully subscribed, I think it's a certain amount can go to the core cities, but there's a limit. But if it's not fully subscribed, then that doesn't take into account. Again, I think I asked this at a CDC meeting not long ago on a different program, but do we have any understanding why these funds are undersubscribed right now? Are you hearing from cities or developers on money being left on the table, and then it kind of skews what I think the intent was if it was fully subscribed?
Mr. Martin?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes, I think I mean, I personally am a little disappointed in how the response this time. We have had many cycles being oversubscribed. From my understanding, it's been more of kind of mixed market signals and kind of we had great reception for our technical workshops. We had, over 150 people register for that. We've had great response from the partner organizations. But when we looked at applications, not only to us, but to our funding partners, they were all down this cycle. So my suspicion is that it's kind of a combination of the mixed markets of the signal, that's kind of mixed messages rather, that are being signaled. Multifamily permits are down, for example, but overall, certain sectors are also undervalued, office, for example. And so those are the types of things that we would typically fund in this program, but we're not seeing as many of those. So that's my suspicion, but it yet to be verified with more than one trend.
And Mr. Chair,
Councilmember Johnson.
I think it was Hillary who might have mentioned that her kind of gut feel on this, and that's my paraphrasing, was on a different one, that just the market had shifted. And I guess I've just, if at some point while we're out talking to cities, if we should just get some anecdotal evidence of why didn't you, subscribe or whatever, because if there are trends, I just like to better understand them from their point of view or a partner's point of view. And I know we want to get the money out there, and these are all worthy projects, but it'd be so nice if we could, in policies, still kind of honor the max for core cities and hold over money for future oversubscribed programs. I don't know if we can do that under state law, but I'm just trying to always know that, what goes around comes around, and we'll then have applications come in that we can't. And so I think, again, it's skewing, and again, all worthy causes, and I'll vote for all of this. And, but I just want to say that, again, it skews that, because we're under the total cap of 3 million in this program,
Thank you,
which is on
Councilmember.
page 4 of the staff report.
Sorry. I have in queue Councilmember Wolf and Councilmember Chambliss. Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would be concerned about putting caps in there different from what is in state law. I mean, it's their money that they're letting us administer, and if we started playing games with it, it might not be coming anymore.
And Mr. Chair, just to
Councilmember
respond,
Johnson.
appreciate that. That's why I said if we're able to. But I just know that, and maybe again, it was different under statutory rules, or we had more flexibility. I just know that in, at least what I think I can recall, is that we were able to, move money into another round or something like that, which we will do. I'll just stop now, but completely understand that. But, if there is any wiggle room, and I'm certainly not trying to play games with the money. I'm just trying to make sure that, we're, whatever. I think y'all got the gist of what I'm saying.
Thank
So
you,
Mr.
Councilmember.
Chair.
Thank you. For the discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
So I think I've heard enough to be clear on the over-under described kind of thought process. But I have heard in this committee many times that we wanted more information, maybe on a more regular basis, on the number of applicants that were, the number of applicants that were accepted, rejected, what location, was there follow-up? Chair, if I might ask that there is a report maybe that comes out to give us that information on a periodic basis.
Thank you, Councilmember. Did you want to say something?
No, may I just ask for
Yeah.
a quick
Director
clarification?
Brajas.
Because we do include that for each funding cycle. Are you looking for that over the course of the year, multiple years? I want to make sure we're getting the
I
right time
think
series.
multiple years will give us information on the trending, and maybe some other council members that have made that request can add to the information, but I believe that, you can do a snapshot, but it doesn't tell you as much. And then maybe even looking at what are the differences within the region.
Make sense?
Yep, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion on the report? Councilmember Carter.
Just to ask one further clarification, or on the same one, actually. I'm pleased that we participate and we are looking at addressing a part of the need for affordable housing. And in the affordable housing arena where we talked about that one issue, we may actually be doing a little bit more. It may be 1% or 3% versus 2%, 1% more that we're addressing. So if you look back at page 5 and make that correction, I'd appreciate it. Love to see us able to address a little bit more, and more, of course, during the year of the affordable housing need. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Further discussion, Councilmember Johnson.
And I'd like to know too, if any of those potential applications would have been in that range that, we count towards overall affordability, but the application would be not received just because we're not going to apply it to this grant of a round of grant funding, if you understand what I'm saying.
Mr. Chair,
Mr.
sorry,
Martin.
point of clarification, in terms of applications that we received this cycle that
Well, and again, just generally the 51 to 80, we track it, but we're not going to apply it in this funding based on our own internal policy, which hopefully isn't playing games with the legislative intent. But I just know that I've had communities that are in that range, and it's very difficult to get funding because everybody's trying to pull, into that 30 AMI or in that lower range. So I'm just wondering if people are like, well, we can't even apply because our affordability doesn't, meet the criteria.
Mr. Martin.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Johnson, yes, we certainly can do that. That currently, because we had that lower tier, we did not ask specifically. But it's something we could go back and look
Yeah.
at.
And I guess that's my point. If they know that they're not going to get it, are they just not, not applying?
In this particular program, of course, you can request funding for market rate units. We have one example today. So it's not necessary for you to be only for affordable housing, but it's certainly a positive and something that we've emphasized in our distribution criteria.
Thank you.
Thanks. Further discussion, Councilmember Chambliss.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify on my request, that would be both to you, Chair, and also to you, that it is not just for the new scattered site investigation, obviously, because this is new, but it's for all the programs that fall under LCA.
That was my understanding.
Okay, and also, I think, I did request information on the follow-up to both the cities that got accepted and rejected, and getting their thoughts, sentiments, and concerns, et cetera.
Thank you for the clarification. Understood, Director Barajas. Cool. Further discussion, Councilmember Carter, did you?
No, that's okay.
Thank you. Cool. Any further discussion?
Move approval?
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Councilmember Lee. The motion has been made to award 4 tax-based revitalization account grants totaling $1.469 million plus change. Discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Hearing none, all in approval, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? That carries. Thank you, Mr. Martin. Thank you, committee members, for the discussion. That dispenses with our business items, our non-consent business items. We'll move into information items. The first is 2023 plant monitoring report. And I know Mr. Mackenzie Young-Walters is here, but it's his first time in committee chambers. And so Ms. Torres would like to introduce the item. Please, Ms. Torres, welcome.
It is. Thank you, council member and committee members. I just want to take 2 minutes to introduce Mackenzie Young-Walters. It's his first presentation, as Chair mentioned. Mackenzie came to us almost a year ago. He started July 3rd, and he came to us from the city of Chanhassen, where he had been there for 7 years previously, working at the local level. He has a master's degree in urban planning and public administration. It's from the University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, so we don't hold that against him. But he, like I said, he's been here for almost a year now. He is not only the council's solar advisor, but he's also the program manager for both plat monitoring and the Ag Preserves program. And I just wanted to take a second and introduce him to you before he started presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Torres. Mr. Young-Walters, welcome.
Thank you very much. In defense of my university choices, I did look at the U of M, but Milwaukee had a 2-for-1 special, and I'm always a value shopper.
Welcome.
So without further ado, I'll start off with the plat monitoring program. Hopefully I can figure out the slide thing. So just a quick overview of the program. This is one of the intersections between data and policy. So as you all know, the comprehensive planning cycle gets started off when communities get their forecasts. They then incorporate those forecasts into their planned land use. So they have to establish what land uses are going to accommodate the growth that's projected to go into the community. So that creates the existing land use inventory that is present in the comprehensive plans. They break it down by what land's being used for single family, multifamily, commercial, et cetera. They also identify areas within their community where they're expecting new development to occur. That's where the plat monitoring program comes in. This is our way of looking and seeing how those guided land use are actually materializing throughout the planning horizon. So this program focuses very heavily on communities in the developing edge, and we'll identify those in a bit. But what they do is as they develop, they, once a year, submit in bulk all the plats they approve. We then look at that, and that lets us know whether or not they're developing in a manner that's consistent with the policies in their comprehensive plan, and from that also the policies that we've established as the Metropolitan Council. We also, as part of this program, track building permit data, and we use that in comparison to where the plats have been created to get a feel for how quickly the region's developing, get a sense of the strengths of the market and those trends. So we'll go through all of that in this report. A little bit of background on the program. It started in 2001. It started with 12 different pilot communities, and the objective was to really measure the effectiveness of the Metropolitan Council's policies. In particular, we were looking at what I was talking about earlier. Are things developing at the densities established by the comprehensive plan and in a manner that's consistent with the policies that have been adopted? This program focuses only on sewered residential developments, so we don't track developments in rural regions that aren't served as part of the Metropolitan Council system. Another thing this does is it helps us monitor the availability of land supply. It lets us look at what areas are still available for development, and then as well as what's been filled in, and that assists our research staff when they create the next forecast, because they know where land's available, where there's still space for stuff to go, and that helps them create those allocations. And a big thing is monitoring the overall net density of development to make sure it's in line with council policies. So this is a map of the participating communities. As I mentioned, there were 12 pilot communities listed here. They're showing in hash marks on this map. The gray communities are all of our participating communities. These are communities that have the land use designations of predominantly suburban edge, emerging suburban edge, rural center, as well as some of our suburban communities. In general, communities that are part of the urban or urban core and are fully built out are not part of the program because they're not engaging in greenfield development. So it doesn't track that. I will note that 6 of our 7 counties are part of this program. Ramsey County is not because it is fully urbanized, so it doesn't have any of these developing edge communities in it. And here's a little bit more, I seem to have jumped ahead of myself a bit, but here's illustrating the point I was making about the areas that are part of the program are the ones that are developing edge, the suburban, urban edge, and emerging suburban core. A quick note on rural centers. Rural centers are not hooked up to the Metropolitan Council's sanitary sewer system, but many of them are in our long-term service area, which means at some point they will connect. So we do also monitor those communities to ensure that they're developing in line with their targets so that when they do connect, it's efficient and everything is within the 3 units per acre policy. So this is where the program, we begin to get into the actual data of the program. This map shows the overall platting activity that's occurring in the Metropolitan Council region. We go back to 2000 and up to 2023. The yellow-orange is the older developments right around the year 2000, and then as it moves into the purple-blue is the more recent. And the big thing is we're seeing platting activity along transportation corridors as well as where there are undeveloped areas. Some additional notes, the areas in gray are those urban core developed communities, so they are not part of the program. You will see a couple that are, I'd almost say legacy communities. They joined the program when they had more land to develop. They're now currently fully developed, but they're still participating in the communities, so you will see some dots within that gray area. But by and large, the activity is in the developing edge because that's what this program's designed to track. The green areas are our agricultural or rural areas that are outside of the municipal urban service area. And so we are not seeing any of the platting there because that's not what we're tracking. One of the things that this program lets us do, because we ask communities to provide us with information on what type of developments they're platting, single or multifamily. This is the slide that shows the distribution mix we've had each year between single family, which is the green, and blue, and multifamily, which is the green. You can see that there's a shift from year to year. Overall, throughout the program, it's been about 55% single-family development, 45% multifamily. This last year was virtually an even split, 50-50 between multifamily and single-family, which was a bit of a shift from last year, which was almost exactly the historical average of the 55-45 split. We did see a pretty steep decrease in the number of units platted. Last year was the highest number we've had since the program started with 11,530, my handwriting could be better, 30-ish units. And then it drops to 6,560 units this year. A lot of the drop was that the single-family home production dropped much faster than the multifamily, so that's why you see the mix evening out towards 50%. Because it's just 1 year, it'd be pure speculation to guess whether or not this year is a blip or if, the last 2 years of really high development were the kind of abnormal situation. So we'll find out next year.
Mr. Chair?
Yeah,
Again,
Councilmember
brief
Johnson.
question. Thank you. This is great information. Appreciate it very much. So when we hear and we know that there are not enough homes out there, there's a home shortage, whether, and you'll hear the builders talk about new construction. So is that because from coming out of '09 with the Great Recession to today, we just lost so much inventory in those previous years, even though we're hitting records here, not in the too distant past?
Yeah, from what I've read and my understanding is we're playing a pretty big catch-up game. From the Great Recession and that very slow 3 or 4 year recovery, the region and the nation as a whole found themselves playing catch-up. And while production, was really good in the last 2 years, it was still falling short, my understanding is, of what we would need to actually be keeping pace with growth.
And Mr. Chair,
question. Yeah,
just
Councilwoman
briefly, and I know we're only going back to 2000, Mr. Chair, Council Member Wolf, you'll appreciate, and you, I think maybe We were around before that. So I'd like to, God, could we go back another decade or two? But I'd also like to just, not for tonight, but it'd be interesting just to see over maybe 3 or 4 decades, as much as we could get data for, the actual kind of average that we ride along. Because, the economy goes up and down. So I just we don't have data going back to before the program started, but I can certainly tell you in the suburbs, there was a big boom going on. And I think it was kind of at that point in time where the renaissance of the urban core was also taking place. So I'm just curious how we can see the cycle. I mean, data is important, but sometimes you need a span of time to understand it, but not necessarily for tonight's discussion. I just find it fascinating.
A comment from Director Barajas.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Councilmember Johnson's a really great question. I know we talk about it in our long 50-year history as well about what happened in the different decades as we do our long-range planning. While we don't have plat monitoring going back, we do have our overall building permit activity, and certainly later this year when our research staff are sharing that, we can have them share our broader range of where we do have, how far back we have activity toward.
Okay, that'd be great. It's sometimes good to just see what the cyclic trends are. And I think the chair has also said, I think you prepare in your organization for a crisis every however
Every 2
many
years.
Yeah, and I just know that in the major economy, sometimes it's 10 or 15-ish. So it's just interesting to see, especially, when we finish up 23 and then into 24 where it'll go to, we finished 23, but 24. So sorry, love this stuff.
Yeah, great data. Director Barajas.
I was just going to add that you're right, we did start booming in the 90s after the recession during the 80s, and that was actually one of the impetus for this program. The plat monitoring program started in 2002, I believe, because there was so much development activity leading up to that, and a big question of whether we had appropriate land supply, appropriate MUSA policy, all of those things. So this was part of the council's way of kind of agreeing with the development community that we need to get our arms around what's happening on that.
Thank you, appreciate that.
Thank you. Further discussion? Hearing none, Mr. Young-Walters.
All right, thank you, Chair. And I also will be really curious to see what the decadal trends are. I love that type of data. Moving on, one of the, as I mentioned, big goals of this program was getting a feel for how local communities are developing. So this graph here shows in blue the range of units that could theoretically have been built with the land that was developed this year. So if every single parcel would have been developed to its absolute maximum density allowed by the comprehensive plan, you would get the top mark in blue. So in theory, the land that was developed could have been 12,500-ish units. If it would have instead developed at the lowest possible limit allowed by the comprehensive plans this year, that number would then drop to around, I think, the 3,500-ish units. What we actually saw was about 6,500 units this year. So a little bit closer to the lower end than the top end. It is below the midpoint. That's been pretty consistent with what we've been seeing the last 7 years or so. We've had our net developed acreage, so the number of units that actually develop once we take out arterial roads, wetlands, undevelopable areas, be closer to the lower end than the higher end of the spectrum. So that does mean that land is being left on the table in one way of looking at it, but they are developing within the range established by their comprehensive plan. Yeah, so midpoint would be 8,000 units by reference, so about 1,500 units below what would happen if everything developed at exactly the midpoint of its allowable density range. This is, again, pretty typical throughout what we've seen from the lifespan of the program. The other big data point that is very important is the overall net developed density. So this sheet lets us know what all of the 45 communities that participate in the program, if we smashed them together into a super city and averaged out their net developed density for what they've approved in the year, this is what it is. The 3 unit per acre midline is the target density that we have for our suburban edge and emerging suburban edge cities. So those are our developing edge that are connecting into the system. With the exception of the 2009 blip where it dropped to 2.8, throughout the history of the program, it's always been at 3 or above. The last few years, we've seen a really steady rise, and we hit a new record this year at 5.8 units per acre for net density. So that's really encouraging to see. I will note that something I observed looking at this is you begin to see that really consistent rise right about when the 2040 comprehensive plans went into effect, which suggests that the higher densities selected in those are being reflected in how things are developing. So again, that's one of the values of this program, is it lets us see how the theory on paper is actually materializing as things develop. So I just wanted to highlight that as an interesting note.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Councilmember
excuse my
Johnson.
ignorance. Can you just explain gross density to me?
Oh, yeah, apologies. Gross density is the land without any regard for what might be on it. So if there's a wetland, that'd be included in the gross density.
Gotcha.
A giant bluff, yeah. Net density is when we take out everything that can't be.
Undevelopable. Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Good clarification. Ms. Jane Walters.
Thank you, Chair. The one note of caution is that this does give a lot of insights, but it is only one aspect. Platted lots are not necessarily built houses. So one of the other things that, oh, sorry, I jumped ahead. I forgot I had another slide on land utilization. So this gets into Councilmember Johnson's question of what are the different parts of land. And one of the things we use plat monitoring for is tracking what land is developable and what land is undevelopable and what's happening when it's being platted. So communities report what acreage is being used for wetlands and water bodies, what acreage is being used for arterial right-of-ways, so that's your interstates and your state highways, county highways, what's going to public parks and open spaces, and then what's going into what we categorize as other use. The vast, vast majority of other use is land that's being reserved for future development. So it'll be an outlot that they're planning to, come back in 2 or 3 years and then build houses on. We take that out from the density calculations. What we see is a really consistent spread. Almost every year we end up about 12% goes to wetlands and water bodies, about 5% is public parks, about 2% is arterial right-of-way, and then all the rest of the variation you're seeing in these graphs is what percentage of land is being reserved for future development versus what's being developed immediately on the plat. And so that's about 20% is those fixed categories I mentioned, and then the 80% slides around between what's being reserved for future and what's being developed in that year. Hopefully that explanation made sense. So what I had started on before I remembered I had another slide is the thing that happens after the lots are created, of course, is building permits need to be pulled. So what we do as part of this program is we also track the building permit data. And we use that to determine how long it's taking from a lot being created to a building permit being pulled. And we call that our lot absorption rate. This doesn't go quite as far back. The building permit data we have that syncs up with this only started collecting in 2009. There's a bit of a weird blip because if we get a permit, for instance, in 2023, that's associated with a plat that we registered in 2000, it would then show up as a lot that took 23 years to create. So that's why even though we only have data from 2009 to 2023, you'll see we have, in our report, I think I mentioned the longest one we have is 21 years, which is outside that threshold. So just kind of an interesting blip that comes up. But there's a lot of variation in the lot absorption rate. It depends on everything from the macroeconomic conditions, housing demand, to how desirable a lot is. A lot located next to a lift station might take a few more years to sell and get built on than, a prime walkout lot with a great view of a lake. And that can be within the same plat. So it is important as we look at this to know that we're talking about individual lots, and this isn't discussing the time it takes for the entire plat to build out. So portions of a plat will build out much faster than others. That being said, vast majority of lots have building permits pulled within 3 years, about 78%. You'll see, so for the 0 years, that means a building permit was pulled the same year the plat was platted. That's 11%, which makes sense. Some plats might not be recorded until November, so not too much building activity in that year. Huge bump at 1 year, about 37%, 20% at 2 years, and then it goes down from there. We don't see many that hang along for more than 10 years, only 3%. So generally speaking, it is safe to say that a fast absorption rate is associated with strong housing demand and a good market. I would mention that you can't draw too many conclusions about the slower, because you will have those isolated lots that for whatever reason just aren't selling. That may have more to do with the individual lots characteristics than the market characteristics. So just a cautionary note there. A little bit more on lot absorption. We do break it down by product type as well as community designation. New this year, I included accessory dwelling units. I want to be clear, we don't have a lot of those, but I think it is something that's worth keeping track of, and obviously they have a higher build time because they don't usually get built with the initial house. So they're coming back on plats that have already been platted. So that's why they're, twice as long as the next one. But I think it'll be interesting to track that going forward, so I just included it this year.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Councilmember Wolf.
how do you compute that? Because, it's not usually something that's on the initial plat that you're going to have an accessory. Where do you get that number?
Yep, so the building permits will tag it as an accessory dwelling unit, and then the building permit data is geolocated. So it'll tell me an accessory dwelling unit permit was pulled for a lot on a plat. So even if that lot already has a house, I'll still get pinged when the accessory dwelling unit permit is done for that lot later on. If that explanation made sense.
Councilmember Wolf.
I get that, but then is your number from when the initial house was built to when the accessory dwelling was built, or how is that number?
This number would be from, Chair, Councilmember Wolf, this number would be from when the lot was created to when the accessory dwelling unit was built. It would not factor in the distance and time from when the house was built to when the accessory dwelling unit was built.
Thank you. Mr. Walters. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Kajamblis.
I just want to make sure I understand that. Are you talking about the lot for the ADU? That's the time that you're starting at, is the lot? So that would be the portion of the original? Or are you talking about, let's say, the lot was permitted before the house was built? So you're going from the time that the lot was permitted, even if the house isn't built?
Mr. Walters, yeah.
Chairman, Councilmember Chambliss. Yep, exactly. So the lot's created, nothing's on it. The house and the ADU are on separate timers. So let's say 2 years later, the house is built. The timer's still ticking for the ADU. If 10 years later, a building permit's done for the ADU, that ADU column would reflect the 10-year period. The period that it took for the house to be built wouldn't factor into that. So it's just from that first lot's creation.
That's it? Cool. Please, Mr. Walters.
Yeah, and my apologies. I didn't intend for that to become that much of a discussion. I just wanted to highlight that.
I'd like to understand.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fun thing to track going forward, so I included it. The biggest thing is everything kind of hovers in that 2 to 3 year range. It is important to note that, single-family homes are the single greatest percentage of our permit volume. It's right around 87%, and that's clustering at about 2.58 years from lot creation to a permit being pulled. We do see some variation by community designation, with the suburban and suburban edge being the fastest growing. It does indicate those likely have the strongest market, but, one caution I would have is with the rural center, we actually have our fastest permit time and our slowest time all within that category. So within each, there can be a huge amount of variation, and statistical weighting also plays a role. If you have a community that has, 6,000 permits that has been cranking them out, it's going to pull its average down compared to a community with 500 that's been taking a little longer to build out. So while there is a lot of use to looking at these trends, there is huge variation at a community level. But by and large, we see the rural centers building out a little slower from their plats than the suburban edge. That concludes the program portion of the presentation. I'll do my best with any questions you may have.
Great. Questions, discussion? Councilmember Wolf.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two things. First of all, on that previous slide where it talks about the lot absorption by type of unit, it looks boring right now. That's a good thing, because it means our land supply is in balance. There have been times when it was not like that, when we had a huge spike in how long townhome lots were going to be absorbed. And that was right when the big recession happened and everything fell apart. So be happy that it's boring. The second one is, reading through the report, you organized it by county. I found the narrative very, very helpful, but the county displays not as helpful. And I was wondering if I could get the information by city with the little wiggly lines like you have on your overall density, the net density, gross density kind of information. We've had that in the past, and that's very helpful to see if things are going on a city by city basis smoothly, or if there's adjustments that need to happen or more questions, because sometimes the single family stuff comes first and there might be land available for more density, and that will pop up periodically. But when it gets aggregated to a county level, I don't feel like I really understand what's going on.
Thank you. Mr. Young-Walters.
Yeah, absolutely. Chair Logan, Councilmember Wolf. That is absolutely information we have. I apologize. I must have missed if it was included in previous years. I tried to do the same, but I easily could have missed it, and we can definitely get that to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion on that report? Questions? Conversation? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Young-Walters, and you're here for the next info item as well, which is the 2023 Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves Program Report. Please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Agricultural Preserves Report, which is showing, okay, good. All right, this is the Agricultural Preserves Program. This is showing the acreage that was put into the Metropolitan Agricultural Preserves Program and stayed there. So if you remember the first slide we looked at in the last presentation, this is the land that is not to be developed. And one of the ways that it can be protected and insulated from development is this program. A quick overview of the program. It's established by Minnesota Statute 473H. It has a comprehensive planning component, which is why it was placed under the responsibility of the Met Council. What happens is communities, when they're doing their comprehensive planning, they identify areas that they want to preserve for long-term agricultural use. Those areas are limited to a maximum density of 1 unit per 40. And once that's established, then any parcel within that area that is 40 acres or larger, with some exceptions, like if the original quarter was 35 acres, then they can be in, and a couple others that we don't need to go into in excruciating detail. But generally, it needs to be a 40-plus acre parcel. The landowner can then apply to the agency, the jurisdiction that has zoning authority to enroll into the Agricultural Preserves Program. If the community consents, it then is enrolled into the program, and the county handles administering the taxation benefits of the program. The program has two big benefits, financial incentives. The big one is it declares the property to be receiving no benefits from assessments. So that means that infrastructure projects can't be assessed against the property, and those expenditures can't raise the price of ownership or, force premature development for the holder. The second benefit is there's a tax credit program. The county looks at the average tax value of township lands throughout Minnesota. 105% of that, it then becomes what they are taxed at instead of the theoretical value of the land if it was developed at its highest and best use. The program also has a statutory minimum of 150 acre for a credit. Dollars per acre for a tax credit. So the owner benefits from either that 105% of the township average amount or the 150 per acre, whichever gets them the greater tax savings. Again, that's not something that we need to go into too much detail on, but we'll talk a little bit more about funding on it later. Once enrolled, properties are enrolled in the program for a period of, at a minimum, 8 years. After 8 years, the owner can request an early exit, so they would establish basically a ticking clock saying, my parcel will leave the program on this date, and then it would exit and be able to develop as normal. There is a new provision from, I believe, 2019 that after that initial 8 years passes, a landowner can request that the city allow them to withdraw early, to essentially immediately leave the program, and that requires majority approval of the approving jurisdiction, so usually the city council. So those are there's a couple other ways, but those are the two main ways a program would leave the system. So these are the enrollment trends for the program. The graph looks a little bit scary just due to how the scale is set up, but the bottom of the scale is 165,000 acres and the top is 215,000 acres. So the changes are much smaller, but this does show the total enrolled in the program from 2001 to 2023. Going through the history of the program, it reached a peak in about 1997 of 202,000 acres. And then it experienced a pretty steady decline down to about 180,000 acres in 2009. With the economic recession, there was increased interest in protecting land. They didn't see it developing, so more properties entered in. The numbers shot up and hit about 210,000 acres in 2013. Things were pretty much unchanged from 2014 to 2017. And now that the market's doing pretty good, we are seeing a slight decline. I will call out, I had a math error in the staff report. I mentioned a year-to-year decline of 4%. That is incorrect. It is 1.6%. The 4% is the acreage decline from the year 2000 to 2023. I misread my chart, so I apologize for that. But the year-over-year decline is 1.6%. So roughly 3,000 acres left the program from 2022 to 2023. In terms of enrollment trends, Carver and Dakota County are where the vast majority of these lands are. Nearly half of the total acreage protected is in Carver County with about 90,000 acres. Dakota County is around 70,000 acres, and then the remainder are spread through all of the other counties, except Ramsey, which is a predominantly developed county and does not have any land in agricultural preserves. Universally, all counties did show some sort of a decline from 2022 to 2023. The following map shows the enrolled parcels. This really clearly illustrates what I was saying. The preserved parcels are very heavily clustered in Dakota and Carver County. Anoka has by far the least amount of acreage enrolled at 468. And Hennepin, Scott, and Washington are all between 6,000 and 10,000 acres. I was looking at the agricultural survey that came out in 2022, and within the 7-county metro area, your fun fact for the day is about 1/3 of agricultural acres are enrolled in this program. So it's definitely a very effective tool for long-term preservation. I mentioned we talk a little bit more about funding. The program is funded by a $5 deed fee and mortgage registration fee. That $5 is split, half goes into the county conservation funds, half goes to the state. The state then cuts it in half again and puts half into the state conservation fund and half into the general revenue fund. In order to make counties whole on the property tax credit, they get reimbursed from their county conservation fund for the acreages enrolled for the tax income they lose through the tax credit. If the county conservation fund is not able to do that, which is the case for Carver and Dakota County, the state conservation fund makes up the difference. If the state conservation fund can't cover it, then the state general fund comes into play. This last cycle, the state conservation fund was sufficient to cover it, so nothing came out of the general fund. But this gives a breakdown of what all the expenditures were for the county. The other interesting thing is the average credit that an acre within the 7-county region got was $1.76 per acre tax credit. There's a lot of variation. Hennepin County was $6.60. Carver County averages about $1.50, and of course it depends on the exact farm. But just to give you a context of like what the benefit of the program is financially.
Mr. Chair,
Yeah, Councilmember Johnson.
Mr. Chair, for Ramsey County, they've got 69,000 sitting in the account. What's going to happen to that?
Yep, so Chair, Councilmember Johnson, my understanding of the program is that counties that don't have acreage or do not expend all of the money on the tax credit can use it for conservation-related activities. If they fail to do so, I believe the state claws it back.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Carter? Absolutely.
She's aware. Yep. Thank you.
If I may, Mr. Chair?
Yeah, Director
The
Barajas.
county only started charging mortgage registration fee recently, like in the last 5 years, sometime before COVID. So it's relatively new and precisely for the reason that Mackenzie was noting, was for conservation purposes.
Councilmember Wolf, you look, you want to say something.
No, I don't really have anything on this. I mean, it's a well-used program. Green Acres is another very popular program that has a little smaller acreage, so hobby farming kind of stuff can fit in with that. And it's not quite as long to get out, but it's working.
Great, thank you. Mr. Young-Walters.
That concludes my prepared remarks, so unless you have any other questions for me, that'd be
Further
that.
discussion on that report, Councilmember Johnson?
Briefly, and Mr. Chair, you don't have to be the owner, it just has to be farmed land, because there's a lot of leased land in my district that's owned by maybe, somebody who's a speculator. So was the goal just to make sure that there's land where something's growing on it, and it doesn't matter who owns the land, but it's requiring, is somebody monitoring what's happening on the land, or it just has to be stated that it's farmland?
Yep.
Mr. Young-Walters.
Yep. Chair, Councilmember Johnson. Yep, so part of the covenant is a declaration that the land will be farmed. To your point, it does not need to be farmed by the owner, but it does need to be an active production. It is the responsibility of the administering agency, so the local jurisdiction, to ensure that it is being properly used. Every now and then, we do get a case where a community will reach out and say, hey, this is going on, is this compatible? And then usually we remind them that we don't enforce that, but sometimes we can give them a little bit of an advisory or let them know where to look in their records to sort out what should or shouldn't be happening on the land.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, thanks. Further discussion on that report? Any further discussion? If not, thank you, Mr. Young-Walters, for the work and for the report. Very interesting.
Thank you very much, Chair, council members.
Yeah, and we will move on to our final information item of the evening. It's an update on fiscal disparities program, and Maya Guerrero-Combs will present. Welcome.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Chair and council members. My name is Maya Guerrero Combs. I am a senior planner here in the Community Development Division, and today I will be providing an update on the Fiscal Disparities Program for the 2024 fiscal year. So today I'll start with a little bit of background on the program and then go into how it works and the numbers for the 2024 fiscal year. Our metro area is known for a tax-based sharing program, which is named the Fiscal Disparities Program after the act that established it in 1971. Through this program, local taxing jurisdictions in the 7-county metro area all share part of the growth in commercial industrial net tax capacity, or commercial industrial tax base. This tax-based sharing program was established in the Fiscal Disparities Act, which was passed by the Minnesota legislature in 1971 and began operating in 1975. The tax-based sharing program continues to attract national and international interest as an innovative tool to improve equity and narrow the gap between the lowest and highest communities in terms of tax-based wealth. And so why do we do this? What are the benefits of the program? The program meets various Metropolitan Council goals and has many benefits to the region, including improving equity and fiscal resources by reducing large differences in tax-based wealth among cities and townships in the region. The program also supports cost-effective regional wastewater treatment and transportation services by reducing competition for commercial and industrial tax base. And the tax-based sharing program also encourages land uses that protect the environment and increase livability, but raise little or no revenue, such as regional parks, open space, and low-income housing. So the program is built into our property tax system, with much of the work being done by county or state property tax administrators. I'll go over a really kind of basic overview of how it works. Through the program or the tax-based sharing, local taxing jurisdictions contribute up to 40% of their growth in commercial industrial tax base to a shared pool that then is redistributed. Commercial industrial tax base includes commercial, industrial, and public utilities, and that 40% of growth is since 1971. So the 40% of growth since the program was enacted. For distribution, kind of that second portion of the program, the shared pool of tax base, or that area-wide tax base, is redistributed using a formula that is outlined in state statute. This formula is based on various factors such as population and relative property tax wealth. Relative property tax wealth, that just kind of means the market value of all property per person in a jurisdiction compared to the average market value per person in the region or the metro area. So what this really means is that a community with relatively low property tax wealth receives a somewhat larger share of the area-wide tax base, and a community with relatively high property tax wealth receives a somewhat smaller share. So there are currently 177 communities who participate in the program. There are six areas, yes, that are excluded by statute. We have New Prague, Northfield, Hanover, Rockford, the MSP Airport, and the St. Paul Airport areas are all excluded. Besides these statutory exclusions, communities can be found ineligible to participate by the state. The Met Council and the Minnesota Department of Revenue have a statutory role in defining the eligibility to participate in the program. According to state statute, a community must be excluded if its comprehensive zoning and planning policies conscientiously, important word, exclude most commercial industrial development for reasons other than preserving an agricultural land use. So very relevant to have all these reports done today. This is enacted so communities who deliberately excluded commercial industrial development couldn't benefit from the sharing of commercial industrial tax base.
The Met Council takes a lead on this review with final determinations set by the Minnesota Department of Revenue. And so under this condition, the following cities are ineligible to participate: Sunfish Lake, Birchwood Village, St. Mary's Point, and Woodland. And these cities have been found ineligible for about the past 20 years or more. Yeah, I think the most recent exclusion was Woodland in 2003. So let's get into the numbers for the 2024 fiscal year. The shared tax base for the 2024 metro area, which is the shared pool of commercial industrial tax base for the fiscal disparities program, ended up being a little under 9% of the total tax base for taxes payable for 2024, which is exactly what is consistent with what we've seen in the last 10 years, and last year was also a little under 9%. The shared pool of tax base as a share of the total commercial industrial tax base in the metro area is 32% this year, which is also consistent with what we've seen really in the last 20 years, including throughout the pandemic. So it's really varied anywhere from 32 to 36% since about 2005. And so what are the actual numbers for that? The taxes payable in 2024, for taxes payable in 2024, the fiscal disparities program shared over $563 million in tax base, which is a little more than $30 million than last year. And we also shared over $693 million in tax revenue for taxes payable in 2024. And so tax revenue is really just the shared pool distribution multiplied by the community's tax rate. So that's what the difference between kind of what the tax base and the tax revenue are. And so because the fiscal disparities program redistributes shared tax base, communities are either net recipients or net contributors of tax base. Net recipients or net gainers of tax base are communities where the distribution from the shared pool was greater than the contribution to the shared pool. And so for taxes payable in 2024, and I will say that there is an error on this slide, when I calculated these numbers, I used city tax jurisdictions by county. So right now that's double counting cities that lie in two different counties. And so instead of 109 net recipients, it's 106. And that is 91 cities and 15 townships. And then for net contributors, which really means that the city's contribution to the shared pool was greater than the distribution from the shared pool, there's a total of 71, not 75, which is 46 cities and 25 townships. Historically, the program has always had more net recipients than net contributors. So this is just a map of all of the participants in the program. It shows all the net recipients or net contributors for the tax-based sharing program. The areas that are white are those that are excluded from the program that were named early in the presentation, either by statute or ineligibility. And so the light red areas are net recipients, and the ones in light blue are net contributors. And here we have a map of the top 20 net contributors and top 20 net recipients. These did not change from last year and have remained largely the same for at least the last 5 years. That's all I looked back, sorry. I can look more, it's interesting. So the top 5 recipients are St. Paul, Brooklyn Center, Apple Valley, Coon Rapids, and Columbia Heights. St. Paul has long been the top net recipient. And the top 20 net contributors are in blue, and they are mostly located in areas that are connected to major job centers or public infrastructure, such as the I-494 and I-694 ring, as well as the airport. And these top 20 net recipients make up really nearly 60% of all commercial industrial tax base in the metro area.
Great. Question from Councilmember Chambliss, then Councilmember Johnson.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, ma'am. I'm interested in knowing how these, at least the top 5 have changed over time. So does anyone recall, you or staff, if any of these net recipients or net contributors have moved from being under the top 5 to top 5, or vice versa?
Ms. Greta Combs?
Yeah, Chair, Council Member, because this program is almost 50 years old, there's definitely been a lot of shifting, especially with St. Paul in particular. And so we have all of the historical information on the website, but I'd love to get you kind of a look at what those top 5 have looked like over the last 20-plus years.
Thank you.
Cool, thanks. Councilmember Johnson?
And I should really know this, but, you know, with COVID era, post-COVID era impacts to commercial industrial properties, is there a lag? How much is that you know, assessed values and the challenges coming on those property values? How much is that lag, and how do we think it could impact this? Or is it, you know, I just think that, because it's based on valuation of everything post 71. So, and we all know this, if you've lived around long enough, you know, the housing market's on fire, and so the commercial properties benefit, and then commercial properties are doing great, and it benefits the housing taxes and things like that. So do we have any sense, because we've been on roller coasters before, I'm not sure on the commercial industrial like we have with housing, but it'd be, I guess, you know, we'll wait and see, but when do we think we might be able to see some of that showing up in the, you know, whether they're a net contributor or net receiver of the
Yeah, Chair and Council Member, that's something that we've been looking out for every year. It's a question that comes up, and it has remained consistent so far through at least the last 10 or 15 years, and who are the top contributors, and the growth has remained consistently increasing throughout the pandemic for our commercial industrial tax base, yeah.
it has?
Yeah, it's the trends have all remained consistent. I would love to dive deeper in it, maybe next year if we see any fluctuations. But surprisingly, it has remained consistent.
And up to what year, 2023? Mr. Chair, sorry.
I went back to 2010.
No, but I mean up to, 2010 to.
Oh, to 2023.
Okay, that's
Yes.
interesting. I'd like to dive deeper in that, because we've also heard at this council meeting that development's backed off and commercial industrial markets are not where they were, and with rates and the economy and inflation and all that. So it'd be interesting to see where that's going. And it is hitting some cities harder than others. I mean, you know, unfortunately, Minneapolis has just got that central core, and St. Paul, you know, it's just changing rapidly, and you know, so we'll see what happens, but I guess it does go to show, you know, there are basic trends. I know a lot of the cities I represent have been net contributors, but you'll see Corcoran as a receiver, and I don't know how long that'll last, because they're on that development edge, and they'll flip one day too. And I know Minneapolis, when I lived on the north side and was very involved in everything, they'd be a receiver and a contributor. That's, you know, so it's just, I think this stuff is fascinating, because I will just say it's been contentious, depending if you're a giver or taker, and you have to see the big picture. And, you know, Metro Cities doesn't like to get involved in that, because it's all their cities, and the League of Cities won't touch it because it's Metro. But in a lot of ways, that's why the Municipal Legislative Commission has popped up, you know, 20, 30 years ago and stuff like that, just history for folks. But this is something that I know communities really watch all the time. So this is great information. Thank you.
Yeah.
Comment from Director Bras?
Oh, I was just going to offer that the commercial industrial market kind of hits the whole region in similar ways, while your tax base might be the same. So that relative wealth is still probably pretty consistent, but I think it'll be really interesting to see if we start to see those impacts, especially that we've been hearing about with vacancy rates and potentially devaluing commercial properties, office space in particular, and what that will look like in the region.
And Mr. Chair, if I may add,
Councilmember Johnson?
Housing First, of course, and housing advocates are looking to change, and I think undo some local control when it does come to comp planning, to be able to allow more mixed use and housing in commercial, because maybe there's opportunities where commercial is just not where it used to be, or it's becoming obsolete, or all of that stuff. So that did not pass. As a city person, I cringe at stuff like that about local control, however, you know, some cities are already doing it, so there's some data, I think, there too, where there's shifting going on, but I just love data. Thank you very much for all of this. I mean, it helps you just relate back to your communities and see the bigger picture of what's going on, so.
Thank you. Ms. Greta Combs.
Great, thank you. I also love data, so. And so.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Wolf.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, my bad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to follow up on the previous discussion. Really, the only big change in the top 5 or 10 on either side, contributors or net recipients, has been Minneapolis. Like was mentioned, they used to flip-flop between, you know, contributor or recipient wasn't big in one way or the other, and then they just shot up, and now they've stayed up there as a big net contributor.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the program really works to reduce big disparities in property tax wealth and improve equity in fiscal resources. The difference in property tax wealth is measured by the ratio of the highest to the lowest commercial tax base per person in a city or township with a population of 10,000 or more. And so without fiscal disparities, the ratio of the highest to lowest commercial tax base per person is 16:1. And with this fiscal disparities program, it narrows that difference to 6:1. So really creating a more equitable region in regards to access to fiscal resources. And then if you look at all participating communities, not just communities that have a population of 10,000 or more, without fiscal disparities, it's 54:1, and with fiscal disparities, it gets narrowed down to 14:1. So just across the board, you're really seeing that equity in action. And that's all I have for you today. I highly recommend checking out the website, which has a lot of really great historical information. The program's been a subject of some books that have been written, as well as a great report in 2020 done by the state. Yeah, and thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks, Ms. Greta Combs. Discussion on that report, Councilmember
Two things, so
Johnson.
thank you, this is great. And maybe it was mentioned, sorry, I was reading an email that related, kind of not related to this, but it's council stuff, so I tuned out for a second. But there was a study not long ago, well, maybe it was long ago now.
2020, right?
I think it was before I was on council. Was I?
So it was before 2020.
Okay.
Yeah, time flies, right? So, and everybody was like, oh, what's the result gonna be? And it was really just a net, it's doing what it's doing, like, I think what we've referenced tonight, but there's a lot of people like, you know, really, you know, so, but the study, kind of like my council governance, it's studied to death and it's doing fine and they just let it keep sailing along. And so that's all I had on this point, but I just had one other quick question for after this agenda item.
Oh, so on this agenda item
Oh, another,
first? Okay,
just-
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you. Yeah, this was very informative. And I also just went and searched our site, since I know there's information that we will be able to find more on this. But in 2021, we actually had some panelists talk to us about the fiscal disparities. And I hadn't forgotten that, even though it says I was in the meeting there, but that was a few years ago. But I think if we could have that perspective and do that again, that would be nice. I don't think we've often had panelists from outside this organization present to the committee of the whole that often. So just thought I'd mention that.
Did you want to say something? Director Bras.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. We always welcome your thoughts on different topic areas for panelists, if you're interested in that. When we did have that panel, we were celebrating the 50 years of the Fiscal Disparities Program, so there was a lot of interest from sort of a lot of folks who were responsible for starting the program or early writers of that work. So it was great to be able to have their historical perspective to share with our current thinking.
Thank you. Further discussion on the fiscal disparities report? Further discussion? Hearing none, thank you very much, Ms. Greta Combs. And Councilmember Johnson, you had a question?
Yeah, just real briefly, I was curious, how are the meetings with city staff going as it relates to the growth projections? And there was a great article in the Star Tribune, I think maybe yesterday, about growth and projections and how certain cities are seeing what's going on in their communities and trying to adapt and make changes for the future. So I just was curious how it's being received, and it's a topic out there, so.
Director Barajas.
Mr. Chair, council members, my update is about a week old. There have been meetings since last week, Monday, when I checked in with staff. And I think there might be a couple more upcoming yet. But generally, this isn't the first time we've had conversations with city staff. So really just digging into details, answering questions about, especially around methodology and additional information. As always, there are some cities that would like to have higher numbers. There are some cities who would like to have lower numbers. So we're just working through some of those discussions, and particularly around communities that are impacted by the White Bear Lake area study, where we have more specifics around why we haven't changed their forecast at this point in time, and have been having more discussions with those communities. But I think generally the conversations are going really well. And sorry, one more forecast event is in Richfield next week. So more to come, and then we'll be sharing certainly with you all adjustments that we made, because this will be part of the council's adoption of Imagine 2050, be part of our document, our public comment document as well. So you'll see the results of those conversations coming up this summer yet.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Right, yeah, thank you for the update. Anything else? Michelle, anything for the committee? Cool, seeing no further business before this committee, we're adjourned.